There wasn't a penny in the door, and I think I can prove it.
Brought to you by my Patreons.
JD and the Janitor, one of the greatest rivalries in sitcoms. All across Scrubs' 8 seasons, we see Glenn Matthews, also known as the Janitor, pull prank after cruel prank on JD. And these pranks are all hilarious. But also you start to wonder, like, why? Why does the Janitor has it out for this one guy? What did he do? Well, Glenn Matthews tells us himself in a song.
It all started with a penny in the door.
We actually see this happening on the first episode of Scrubs, when JD is waiting for someone in front of this door, and Glenn is trying to fix it because it's stuck with something. JD comments that it could probably be a penny, and then Glenn says, like, why did you put a penny in there? And obviously JD tries to explain that he didn't, and then he leaves, and then Glenn later tells to JD that there was in fact a penny stuck in that door. And he believes that JD put the penny on there on purpose, and that's the reason he starts picking on him for the next 8 years. And okay, eventually in the last episode of Scrubs, JD and Glenn have a conversation about this. And Glenn says that he has kept the penny, and he shows JD a penny, a collar that he has. And finally, JD admits that he was indeed the one who put the penny on the door, but that it was an accident. He says that a penny fell from his pocket and that it rolled into the door. And then Glenn says that, yes, of course, he saw that happening. And then JD is obviously very confused. But then Glenn explains that the reason he was picking on JD was not because he put a penny on the door, that was an accident, but that because he didn't admit that it had happened. When I first watched this scene, I thought this was supposed to be what actually happened, that we were supposed to believe that this was real. But then I got mega depressed and I watched all of Scrubs, as you do, and I realized this cannot be what happened. Because on the first episode, we see everything relevant in JD's first day working on Sacred Heart. And we never see this penny falling from his pocket and rolling into the door. In fact, when we see Glenn working on trying to fix this door, he's trying to fix something up there. If the penny had really rolled from his pocket, it would have gotten into the door at the bottom, not at the top. There's no way that could have happened. Then, in another episode, Torque comments about all the things that JD is afraid of.
The only thing JD's scared of is sharks. And he has this weird thing with pennies, but that's it. He's not scared about this.
And he mentions pennies specifically. And in fact, later in that same episode, when JD gets his change in this bar, he gets some pennies, and he doesn't even touch them. He's disgusted at them. Now, why is JD afraid of pennies? Who knows? Probably because money is dirty and causes infections, and he doesn't want to put his patients at risk, something like that. I don't know. But the point is that if JD is so disgusted with pennies, why would he have a penny in the first place? And if he didn't have a penny, it couldn't have rolled and got into the door. So this story is making less and less sense. Oh, also, when Glenn shows JD the penny that he supposedly put in the door, that penny is from 2006, but the first episode happened in 2001, so there's no way it can be the same penny, so yet another evidence for why Glenn is making all of this up. Finally, the last evidence that JD didn't put the penny on the door is that on the last episode of season 1, we see Glenn once more trying to fix a door, and then when another intern comes by, Glenn accuses this intern of jamming this door with a paper clip. So, either the interns at Sacred Heart just go around jamming random objects into doors, or Glenn made all of this up. He just fabricates these situations to have a justification for picking on the new interns. And then, in the case of JD specifically, he spent the next 8 years gaslighting him about something he didn't do until JD ended up believing that he actually did it. Which, I mean, honestly would be just right on brand for Glenn Matthews. But why? Why does Glenn do all of this? Well, I think we get the answer in an episode of season 8, when these three interns are hanging out in the parking lot. Because everyone in this show hangs out in the parking lot. They never go to the front of the hospital. Anyway, so they are in the parking lot, and then the cart of the janitor is there, and so they take some candies from it, and then they think that the car is rolling down and it's gonna hit someone, but it turns out that it's just another prank from Glenn. And then Glenn says that he's angry, that they touch his stuff. And so later, when these interns are gonna get into an elevator, he stops one of them, Sonny, and the other two get into the elevator, which then gets closed and it gets stuck and the lights turn off and they are really scared. And he explains that he's doing this so that they learn not to touch his stuff. But then Sonny is like, wait, why aren't you picking on me as well? I also was there.
Why did you keep me from getting on the elevator? I touched your cart too.
It's simple. I don't mess with you because I don't think you can take it. You're not strong enough.
Because you aren't strong enough to take it. And I think this phrase just unlocks the character of the janitor. Okay, so let me paint you a picture. I think that Glenn Matthews didn't have a very easy life. I mean, he never tells us details about his past, and it's always played for laughs. But this is exactly what someone would do if they had deep traumas in their past. In fact, in one episode, when there is a deaf patient, Glenn comes because he's the only person at the hospital who is fluent in sign language. When they ask him why he's fluent in sign language, he comes up with a weird story about his parents and his deaf sister. And when they ask if any of that is true, he says some of that is true. So I think that, yeah, Glenn somehow had some kind of difficult childhood. He probably did really have a deaf sister. And then because of this difficult life, he probably didn't have many opportunities. And that's why the only job he could find was as a janitor in Sacred Heart. And I think this was really difficult for him, because what Glenn wants most in the world is to be respected and to be appreciated. I mean, the one time he gets to help with a patient, when he has to hold the legs of this woman having a seizure, he brags about it for days. Instead of that, he has this job where no one appreciates him, to the point that no one even asks his name. Famously, throughout the whole show, everyone calls him just the janitor. I mean, can you imagine how bad you would feel if the people you work with alongside every day for nearly a decade or more just never asked what your name is?
I've been here for 8 years and I don't know your name. I call you the janitor. I'm sure I have asked you what your name is.
I don't think so.
Really?
People don't want to know a janitor's name. You've probably forgotten my name already.
I mean, he acts like if it doesn't bother him, but it probably does. And so, for all of these reasons, Glenn wants to lash out against these selfish doctors who never even learn his name. But deep down, Glenn is still a good person, and he just can't hurt these people. Or at least, not unless they can take it. I think that Glenn is an excellent judge of character. And so whenever he sees someone that seems emotionally strong, he decides to pick on this person and play cruel pranks on them, just to vent out his frustration because no one in the hospital appreciates him. And so, I think that the reason Glenn picks on JD more than anyone else is because JD has an exceptional emotional strength. I mean, just look at some of the things that happen to JD in the show. At one point, he is homeless, living on a tent. He has an illness that he faints when he poops. And the mother of his child had a miscarriage. Except no, she didn't. She was lying to him for months. And all the while, the love of his life is getting married to someone else. And on top of that, his mentor abuses him verbally. And this is nothing new. This has been going on for years. And despite all of that stuff that happens to JD and more throughout the series, JD always stays just a charming, benevolent, compassionate person. To the point that when the hospital has the patients rank the doctors, JD is number one. Because just no one has more compassion than him. No one cares more about his patients than him. And he does this despite all of this shitty stuff happening in his life. And of course, and on top of all of those things, the janitor is still playing cruel pranks on him. And still, JD doesn't seem that angry at him, doesn't seem to hate him or to lash out at him ever. I mean, when Glenn is gonna get married, he invites pretty much everyone at the hospital, and yet one of the few people that goes there is JD, and the other people that go is just because JD convinced them to go. Pretty much no one was going to go to his wedding. In summary, Glenn plays cruel pranks on people that he perceives as emotionally strong to vent the frustrations of his life, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't care about people that are emotionally weak. Let's look at Glenn's friends. We have Todd, the surgeon who cannot stop making sex jokes. We have Ted, the mega depressed lawyer of the hospital.
Not G! Oh!
And Doug, the doctor who is so terrible that pretty much all of his patients die. What do these people have in common? Well, they are the weakest people in the hospital, emotionally speaking. Especially Ted. I mean, he's incredibly depressed all the time, and it's very funny. But all of these people are also very competent. We are told several times that despite Todd's childish attitude towards sex and stuff like that, he is an excellent surgeon.
Somehow I keep forgetting that Todd is a skilled surgeon.
Hey, how come you didn't page me about that surgical consult?
I did. You're wearing your garage door opener on your hip.
Ladies and gentlemen, number 2.
Doug is a terrible doctor, but then he finds his calling as a pathologist. He can figure out why people died, and he can probably be really good at diagnosing illnesses. And he becomes really confident in his job. And finally, Ted tells us all the time that he is a terrible lawyer, but then Kelso never fires him. He's been working at the hospital for years, and yet the hospital is not going bankrupt with lawsuits and stuff like that, so Ted must be doing something right. In fact, probably the only reason why we think that Ted is a bad lawyer is because he thinks he is a bad lawyer. But in fact, he must be actually competent. And so the janitor surrounds himself with all of these people who are competent but have other problems in their lives, and he actually helps them. I mean, we see them giving them these seminars, and yet we are led to believe that these seminars are just like just Glenn scamming his friends for money. But then look what happens when Ted falls in love with Stephanie. Glenn and JD join forces to help him, and it actually works. So I think that Glenn is actually really trying to help his friends, and he's also making some money out of it. He's not completely selfless, I think, but the point is that in the end, Glenn is a good person who has good intentions. He doesn't want to hurt anyone who cannot take it, and to the people who cannot take it, he wants to help them to be stronger. And so that's why I think in the last episode, when Glenn and JD are talking about the penny in the door, and finally after 8 years the gaslighting has worked and Glenn made JD believe that he really did put the penny in the door, he says that you missed on a wonderful friendship.
It was a test of character. You failed, and you lost out on a wonderful friendship.
And yeah, you immediately get the feeling that they could have been really good friends. I mean, they both have this weird fascination for taxidermy and dead animals and stuff like that. They are probably really silly fantasies. Yeah, they could probably be good friends. So I think this is not so much Glenn complaining to JD, but complaining to himself that he just cannot let himself be friends with someone that he feels so much resentment towards, right? And then but then, as he walks away, JD says,
We could still be friends.
we can still be friends. And I love this moment because this man has been treating JD like shit for 8 years. And yet, JD is such a pure, good person that he can still say, you want a friend? I can be your friend. I will be your friend. And Glenn stops for a moment, he considers it, and then he keeps walking. But I think he keeps walking because he has an image to protect. But I like to believe, my headcanon is that Later that day, or that week, maybe Glenn either calls JD or goes to his hospital or his home or something, and he says that, yeah, I do want to be your friend. And it's difficult for him, because remember that he has this inferiority complex towards people that have more important jobs. But probably hopefully, he can look beyond that and actually be friends with JD. And I hope, because they would be really good friends. And so, yeah, there was actually never a penny on the door. There was just Glenn Matthews, an eccentric man who just wanted to feel appreciated and respected and loved. And finally, I want to end this video with a request for you. If in your life you come into contact with janitors or security guards or any of these people whose jobs are not very glamorous but keep everything else running, just ask them their names and maybe strike conversations with them once in a while. Who knows? You might find a new friend. Anyway, that's it for the video. Thanks so much for watching, and goodbye.
Special thanks to Automatism, Valerie Hyde, T. Hyphy, Ryan Roberts, Carlo Facioli, and Cookie Softy. All my Patreons, thanks 1,000 times, thanks 1,000,000 times.
Let's compare JD's emotional strength to the other characters in the show. Torque cries in the bathroom if his manliness is even slightly questioned. Dr. Cox is already his own worst enemy. He doesn't need anyone else picking on her. Elliot is, at least at the beginning of the show, she's kind of fragile. She's also her own worst enemy. Yeah, not a good idea to pick on her. Dr. Kelso seems pretty strong in the hospital. He's the boss, but his home life seems pretty tough. So yeah, he needs a place where he can actually be strong to escape from all the shittiness of his home life. Carla, the janitor could probably pick on Carla, but maybe he doesn't because he wants to pick on doctors specifically because they have the most prestigious job at the hospital.